Perfect. So I would like to start by introducing our Farm to School BC webinar today by introducing our speaker. Dr. Tammara Soma is an assistant professor with the School of Resource and Environmental Management at SFU. She's the co-founder and research director of the Food Systems Lab, and basically a fabulous person who does really fun webinars, so you guys are in for a treat. She's a committee member of the National Academies of Science, a systems approach to consumer food waste, and a food system planner. So I will pass it over to Dr. Soma for our territorial acknowledgement and to get started on our presentation today. Thank you, Dr. Soma.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much, Addie. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's hope it will work. And then you can tell me how it looks like. Do you see my screen now? It's so messy. Sorry, apologies, my computer. It's very, very messy. Okay, so I think you can see my slide. I'm just gonna make it full screen, and then I'm going to minimize this so you can see this better. Okay, so I'm going to give a territorial acknowledgement. I can't really see people right now. If you have a question or something, please feel free to chat, to put it on the chat, and Addie will probably nudge me, okay? So before we start the presentation, can you by any chance hear me? Yeah? Oh, sorry. Addie, can you hear me? I just want to make sure that.
Sorry,
okay.
I'm giving you a thumbs up. I can hear
you.
Oh,
okay, sounds good. Perfect. So before we start the presentation, I would like to acknowledge that I'm sharing this virtual presentation from the unceded ancestral territories of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I just want to mention, that as earthlings, people who live in the earth, our survival is based on ensuring balance in our practices with the natural environment and also other relations. Being balanced is about being just. In the absence of justice, as you can see now around the world, there will be no peace. This is why any food work without consideration of justice will ultimately replicate the same oppressive structures. So hopefully today, and I'm so grateful that you're taking your busy time away, from everything else to come and sit with me and attend this webinar. I hope today we can brainstorm some ideas together. I also hope that this presentation can be useful for many of you. Okay, let's start talking about the food apocalypse, okay? So let's go here. Yes, oh, scary. Sorry about that. Did that shock you? I hope it did not shock you. Okay, so when I first did this presentation to a group of students, it was way before COVID. This was like this winter 2019, and the idea of a food crisis was far away in the distant. The students that I talked to were more interested in zombie apocalypse or zombie pandemic than any food issues. So I apologize, there will be a lot of zombie references, but I will show you why zombies are relevant, especially when we're thinking about emergency preparedness. Apparently, based on the picture, zombies really like pickles, which is, by the way, a great way to lengthen the shelf life of food. So again, a good thing to learn skills in terms of, how to how to prepare amidst a food apocalypse. Okay, so a little bit about me. People call me Dr. T. You can call me Tammara, but a lot of people like to call me T. I work at SFU at the School of Resource and School of Resource and Environmental Management. You can tell that I've been having coffee the whole day. I'm just like ready to like run out the house and just go hyper. So anyway, I am a self-professed food system planner. So what a food system planner is basically a planner that works to integrate food system consideration into land use planning decisions. I also run a social innovation lab, which is super fun at SFU called the Food Systems Lab. And equity is a big part of my work. And as you can tell from my photo, I'm also obsessed with food and trash. And I'm also obsessed with Netflix, which I will explain because it's all connected to the whole zombie theme. So the zombie food apocalypse connection started with this innocent game. I don't know how many of you have seen or heard of this game. It's called Plants vs. Zombies. I mean, what can be better than, you know, a bunch of fruits and vegetables, very cute, by the way, destroying evil zombies, evil forces that tries to eat knowledge. I mean, brain, you know, because brain is the source of knowledge. So this game was basically made for someone like me. This initial entry into this game, you know, got me a little bit more courageous because I'm someone who's completely afraid of horror movies. I just cannot watch it. Watching horror movies will mean that I probably can't sleep with the lights off for 2 years straight. So anyway, this kind of got me more interested with the zombies. So I was like, okay, you know, maybe I can watch some zombie movies now. Well, thanks to Netflix, okay, thanks to Netflix and the $14.99 that I pay every month, I started watching more more apocalypse and zombie type movies, like, you know, doomsday, end of the world type kind of movies. And that's when I started noticing something really relevant to food. So, you know, as I engross myself in all of these zombie stories, so like anything from like Zombieland or, you know, The Bird Box or A Quiet Place, you know, everything that has to do with these kind of apocalyptical movies, I started noticing a recurrent pattern. One, the most important thing in the movie usually is access to food. Basically, also, every time the actor, like the main character, tries to access food, that's usually when the zombies are going to creep up from the other shelf and try to chomp on them or eat their brains. So basically, you know, there's a connection there, you know, food access, zombies trying to chomp you while you're trying to get access to food. Okay, so I started making the connection. And, you know, for a long time before the pandemic, food was basically something that was taken for granted. You definitely don't take food for granted now, I feel like, especially when access to food means that, you know, you have to line up in long lines and you have to be so worried about your health and your family's health. So I think that's the one thing that start to make me realize how these zombie movies are actually very useful in terms of just creating that kind of like awareness of how food is so essential for survival. And so I think that we need to appreciate more that our existence and our survival basically depends on food, but not just food alone, just like as a commodity or as, you know, something you buy in the supermarket, but basically all of the associated systems, the land, the water, the biodiversity. And so my hope today is that, you know, it would not take another pandemic or more zombie movies for people to realize that why we need to start planning now. And not longer than that, but we need to start planning now. So again, when I first noticed the connection, I thought, okay, maybe I should do something about this. This is really interesting. But then when I went into the internet, to the lovely Google, I realized that actually a lot of different organizations and institutions have connected that kind of zombie or like, you know, scary pandemic type materials into their emergency preparedness. And that's because a lot of people just don't pay attention. And I think this is also the case, has been the case where people don't pay attention until it's too late. So whether it be zombies, earthquakes, wildfires, hurricanes, global pandemic, you know, everything really boils down to survival and preparedness, whether it be long-term food resiliency or short-term preparedness. So I think that this is why this whole zombie kind of metaphor is very useful. And this is a materials like awareness campaign type materials that's been prepared by the US Center for Disease Control. They have really good literature and curriculum for kids, including, you know, like a zombie comic book that ties back again to why you need to prepare for emergencies. And it's just a one way to get, especially kids in the younger generation, to start getting interested into getting involved. So one thing that I want you to remember is that basically there's two steps. There's two steps to either preventing and preparing for a food apocalypse. So the first step is a long-term thinking, planning, right? So that means, you know, thinking about food system resiliency, thinking about long-term self-sufficiency. So this, you always need to have these two elements. And then the second one is the short term. So surviving disruptions in an emergency or a disaster. So do you have your backpack ready? Do you have some extra canned food? You know, things like that that would not result in you know, like what happened with people when they all like rush into the supermarket the first thing, and just like there was a lot of hoarding, there's a lot of issues. So you need to have both angles, the long-term resiliency and the short-term. And before, when I used to ask this question, is the food apocalypse or a food crisis possible? A lot of people definitely would say, I don't know what you're talking about. Why are we even talking about this? Is this even, does it even matter? And I think now we're starting to feel that we're not that secure, we're not that resiliency, that there's actually a lot of precarity in the food system. So I would say that yes, I think it's more likely that a lot more people are thinking that a food crisis or apocalypse is possible. And beyond the pandemic or zombies or what have you, I want to talk to you about this particular scenario. And this scenario is called the perfect storm. So this perfect storm is a very important scenario that was put forward by Sir John Beddington. And so according to Sir John Beddington, in the perfect storm, there will be an increase of food scarcity, followed by an increase in water scarcity, followed by an increase and coupled by an increase in energy instability, which will then lead to more violence and conflict and tension, leading to further global mass displacements of peoples and refugees, and then eventually a global war, a major global war. Okay, and think about the technologies that we have now that we don't have before in all the previous wars. So this is something that's called the perfect storm scenario. So in the beginning, when I used to think about this and look at this scenario, I thought, okay, is this, is this science fiction? But according to Sir John Beddington, who was the former UK chief scientific advisor, basically by 2030, we would need to produce 50% more food, we will need 50% more energy and 30% more water to feed 9 billion people if we don't want the perfect storm. What he's saying that if we don't do all of that, we will get that big perfect storm that will lead to all this massive chaos globally. The one thing that I would want to be a little bit careful about in terms of some of the claims and the assumption is that, I don't know if you know, but right now we actually currently grow enough food to feed anywhere between 10 to 12 billion people. So our population right now is about, a little bit over 7 billion. And Sir John Beddington is saying we need to do all of these things to feed 9 billion people. But right now, at this very moment, we have more than enough food to feed all of us and more. But the thing is, the problem, a big problem actually, is that anywhere between 30 to 50% of the food is actually wasted globally to the tune of $1 trillion. In Canada, it's $49 billion worth of food wasted, while 1 in 8 Canadian families are food insecure. So again, a massive issue, a massive paradox, something that you've probably seen in the newspaper too. You have long, massive lineups at the food bank, while at the same time, farmers are culling food left, right, and center and dumping milk, this massive food waste amidst food insecurity. So what we can say is that it's happening. And before, again, when I used to talk about, these things, these food crises are happening in different parts of the world already. So again, beyond the pandemic, it can happen due to a political crisis, right? It doesn't have to be a disease. It can be because of hyperinflation. So this is, for example, the case in Venezuela. And I think what's important to remember, with the case of Venezuela is that this is a tropical country that can grow food year round, but unfortunately, relies so much on food imported from the United States and Colombia for its local population. And in fact, some of the agriculture that is conducted in the country is focused on commodity exports of like coffee, for example. So it's not necessarily for local food self-sufficiency. Okay, so beyond the pandemic, political crises can also create a major food apocalypse. Another thing that's a massive issue also is the pollinator apocalypse. Okay, if we have so many apocalypses, it's crazy. But basically, bees pollinate 70 of around 100 crop species that feed 90% of the world. Their work, if you actually calculate the economic impact, is basically about $30 billion annually. And so their survival is in jeopardy for various reasons, many of it also including because of pesticide. So this is also important because, again, they're important species, they help us survive, and right now there's a crisis with honeybees. So what a supermarket would look like, for example, without honeybees would be something like this, where a big majority of our fruits and vegetables would not be pollinated, so therefore it would not be available for us. So again, something to think about. Politics, diseases, insects, right? So all of these things that are important. So as you know today, COVID-19 has impacted a lot of our food supply chain, and this has resulted in, I remember that there are people, many people would say, like, they go to the grocery store and they can, go to the cafe, and it's kind of like a fun activity to do maybe, but this is not the case anymore. Long lineups, maybe one person per family, quotas on certain items, a lot of worrying about germs and everything. And also when you actually go there, sometimes there's like shelves are bare, right? Things are definitely much better in BC, but elsewhere there's still a lot of issues. And I think it's really important to remember that, this can escalate if you think about the fact that, borders are not fully shut down. So according to all of the different studies that I've read, if the borders were shut down, completely shut down, most of the major centers, most of the major cities, for example, in Canada, think Vancouver or Toronto, would only have 3 days worth of food. So just to remember, when the COVID pandemic happened, food was still flowing from different places. So in general, although there was a disruption, it was not as bad as, we would only have 3 days worth of food. But it's still something important to remember because, as I mentioned, food apocalypse can be due to many, many different things. So what can you do? Okay, so I've talked about a lot of depressing things, a lot of very heavy things, but what I like to do is I also like to talk about solution. And I think there's, again, there's actually hundreds or thousands of steps that you can take to prevent a food apocalypse. But at this point right now, I'm just going to share with you, 6 because we don't have a lot of time. So the first one is seed saving. The second one is zero food waste, which is use every part of the food. The third one is identify food assets. The fourth one is grow food everywhere, including garlic for vampires. I don't know why I put garlic for vampires. Oh, because I was talking about zombies. That's right. And then polyculture, which is diversifying, and then building closed loop cities. Okay, sounds good. Oh, by the way, can you see like the column in front of my slide that shows all of the people? Like, is it okay? Good. It's not blocking. Good. Okay. So the first one, oh gosh, that scared me. Food asset mapping. Okay, so it's very, very important. Strategy number 1, that you map out your nearest food assets. Okay, so food asset mapping is a tool that's very useful to identify food related assets. City of Vancouver has a food asset map. Surrey has a food asset map. Richmond has. The one thing that I would say is a lot of food asset maps are focused just on kind of like the built infrastructure, like supermarkets, the food banks, community kitchens. I want you to start thinking outside of the box and think about the natural environment. So natural assets. Where can you get, maybe if you eat fish, a fish? Where can you forage for berries? Where can you get good mushrooms? Things like that are in the natural environment, because that's also important, especially when the supermarkets are not a safe place for you to go to, like with this zombie right here. It's very easy to do. You can use Google My Maps or use a paper map. You can do this as a fun activity with your kids, for example, and identify like all of these important spaces, and you can take pictures while you're doing that. So I'm just going to show you an example that I did in the university. So we did a community food asset mapping exercise with participants and residents of the city of Vancouver, and it was so much fun. We had stickers, we had markers. Basically, we had a big map kind of splayed out, and everyone started jotting down all of their important assets. And this is also a great way, if someone has more knowledge than you, they can actually share you some cool spaces that you didn't know even exist, right? Some cool food assets. So that's one thing, strategy number 1. Strategy number 2, seed saving. Seed saving is so important. So I don't know if you can see the picture on my left side is basically what's called a seed library. So I have not seen that in BC yet. Maybe I haven't traveled that much, but in Toronto, where I moved from, we had seed libraries in multiple different libraries, like public libraries. So a seed library is a place where people can share seeds. So you have extra seeds that, you grew tomatoes, you dried some, put it in a little envelope, and then put it in the seed library. And then someone can basically take a few, and then they can like also add to it. So it's a way for community members to not always have to go and buy and get a seed, but you can actually share the seed, right? This is all about building community. Again, that's one good thing. Why do I have a picture of Matt Damon beyond the fact that he's an amazing actor? Well, because Matt Damon actually was in Mars, you know, and he was really in a bad situation. He had a food apocalypse of his own, and he thankfully had some potato seeds. And he used his own, you know what, you know, to grow the potato seed as a fertilizer. And again, it just shows how important, you know, seed saving and seed sharing is for survival. The picture on the other side that looks like kind of a futuristic building is called the Global Seed Vault. I can't pronounce the name. It's like Norwegian. I think it's like the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. And it's located in the Arctic, basically 1,300 kilometers from the North Pole. And it carries over 400,000 seeds. Do you know why they're doing that? Do you know why they're keeping the seed vault in the Arctic? Very high security, 400,000 seeds. That's because they know that if something happened, like a big nuclear war or a major disaster, and we lost all of our crops, this is a way for them to basically start growing and replanting the earth again. So, you know, the scientists are already thinking about this. I think we need to, as a community, think about this more. Strategy number 3, zero food waste. So use every single ingredient. I put a picture of corn there for you, and I don't know how many of you have seen this like purple looking lumpy, it looks like a zombie corn. Basically it's like a corn that's been eaten by a zombie and then it got all infected. But anyway, so this corn is called huitlacoche, and it's basically infected by a fungus that's actually a delicacy in Mexico. It's edible, it's tasty. And what happened is, if you didn't have that knowledge, if you didn't know that it was edible, maybe a farmer would just throw it away, right? Or you would throw away. But actually, you know, if you go and go to a Mexican restaurant, a nice one, you know, you'll probably see something like this, you know, in a very nice delicacy type of dish. Another thing also, like, you know, corn on the cob, you know, the cob itself can be used for making broth and for many other things. And then the husk itself can be used as packaging. So instead of using plastic packaging or something else like styrofoam, this is actually a good way for you to have like a biodegradable plastic packaging and not just throw the corn husk into the compost, right? So use every single ingredient. That way you can actually stretch things more a little bit. Okay. Another thing, strategy 4, grow food everywhere. And when I say everywhere, I'm talking about everywhere. Grow it in your balcony, grow it on your rooftop. Well, you need to ask permission. You can't just don't follow my advice unless you've asked permission, okay? Because then don't blame me, because then there's a recording of me saying this. But basically, if you see the picture on the bottom corner where it just looks like a kind of like a farmland, that's actually the rooftop of Ryerson University, which is so cool. So that's a rooftop farm, and they grow lots and lots of food there at Ryerson University. And so if you, from an urban planning perspective, if you think about the urban centers and you say, well, there's, you know, a lack of land, there's lack of space. If we actually look at all of the top of the buildings as kind of a real estate, and mind you, maybe not the big giant skyscrapers, but then things start becoming more possible, right? So strategy 4, grow food everywhere. Strategy number 5 is to diversify. And that's also called polyculture. So you can see in the picture, right, like what it looks like. I think what's really important about this picture also, it's just about resiliency, and it's about reducing, like, so in at SFU, there's this community garden, and we do like square foot gardening. What's really good about square foot gardening, where you really pack all of the plants into like little square foot squares, is that it reduces pests, and then you actually get a lot more from that plot, from that little plot, than if you just kind of like planted one food. Okay, so strategy number 5 is to diversify. Strategy number 6, and I think we talked about some short term and then a long term, and then strategy number 6 is building closed loop cities. I think why building closed loop cities is so important is because that's when we can actually create self-sufficient cities that are not so reliant on imported food. So I'm not saying that we're not going to import food at all, but what I'm saying is that, you know, if the borders are disrupted and we create closed loop systems and circular food cities, that will help us a lot more in terms of, like, you know, accessing fruits and vegetables. You know, the city of Victoria did something really cool where they said, okay, you know what, we do a lot of flower growing, but right now what we're going to do is we're going to start planting seedlings, and then get all of these seedlings and plants to community members so that they can grow it. Another thing that I'm also jealous is in the city of Vancouver, you guys can keep chickens, you know, for eggs, but in Burnaby, that's not the case. So in Burnaby, if I kept chickens, done. I would not be allowed to do that, right? So different cities have kind of like different interests and ideas in terms of food security, and what we need to do for the long term is build cities that are food secure. So I'm basically going to wrap up my presentation, but so in this part, I really want you to kind of brainstorm and think about, and it doesn't have to be now, you can digest all of the things that I've been kind of bombarding you with. But you remember Sir John Beddington, his projection is that by 2050, in a world of 9 billion people, we will be faced with like massive, you know, like a crisis of epic proportion. And so how can you help save the world? So what I'd like for you to do, okay, in your spare time, or maybe if you're a parent or caregiver, you have your kids, and this would be a fun thing for them to do, is come up with a very novel idea to prevent or survive during a food apocalypse. You can use any of the 6 kind of strategies I mentioned, or you can come up with your own. If you do use any of the 6 core strategies, maybe add a twist to it. So if you tweet your idea to my Twitter, I was gonna say Twitter, to my Twitter at Tammara Soma, I will share it. And also I'm going to choose the top idea, and the top idea will get a gift card for a book prize. And it'll be online, so you don't actually have to go. And it will be a book prize from a bookstore right here, locally owned, an indigenous, locally owned bookstore called Iron Dog's Book, okay? So please do share your tweet. You can share a picture, you can share something else, but anyway, I'd love to hear your feedback, especially if you have something very exciting to share. So lastly, I just wanted to mention that I am going to do an online food course this fall 2020. It's going to be on, I just said it's online, yeah, and it's clearly online on YouTube. But it's an online, it's going to be fall 2020. It's called REM 357, Planning for Sustainable Food Systems. And if you are, you know, it's also going to be offered asynchronous. So it means that you can, you know, take the course at nighttime if you want, or 4 o'clock in the morning, you know, it doesn't matter. As long as you watch the videos and you complete the assignments, you can definitely take the course. If you have any questions about this, you can email me at Tammara_Soma@sfu.ca. My website is foodsystemslab.ca. And if you want to connect on Twitter or LinkedIn, you can just connect. So yeah, that's me. That's the presentation. And I hope I didn't scare you with the zombie or the food apocalypse. Actually, I'm kind of hoping that you're a bit scared of the food apocalypse, so it will move you into action. And yeah, hopefully we can collaborate together and do something cool. Okay, that's it from me.
Thank you so much. That was so entertaining.
I hope so. I hope I didn't, you know, make anyone sleep or fall asleep or something.
No, I don't think anybody could sleep listening to you. That was lovely.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, totally open for question. I don't know. I actually lost track of time. I don't know what time it is right now.
It's 4:05.
Oh, okay. So yeah,
Yeah.
we have plenty of time to talk. If anyone wants to chat a little bit more or have any questions, happy to do that. And do you want me to stop sharing?
Why don't you just leave it up for a minute, just in case anybody
Wants to look at other slides.
Yeah, or wants to grab your email. So it's Tammara_Soma, right? It's kind of hard to tell. Okay.
Tammara_Soma@sfu.ca is my email. And yeah, I'm really excited about this food course because hopefully because it's online and it's asynchronous, a lot more people can come and we can talk about lots of different things, from food justice to food waste to food access, everything food. And we're also going to do some like fun things.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Anyone have any questions?
You can write your questions in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself as well if you'd like to do that. Just while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I'd like to go to Menti, and we can do a quick takeaways. And it's kind of nice to see what people have got from the presentation. Nice to see what other people do. So
Yeah,
if you wouldn't mind stopping sharing your screen.
I will do that.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. One thing that I always talk about with my student is, one, I usually sound like a chipmunk, and number two is I usually talk super fast when I get excited about something. So if you put on Menti that, okay, I remember a chipmunky voice talking fast about something, that's also fine.
So if everybody could go to www.menti.com, and the code is 796150. And then you can type in up to 3 words or phrases about anything that was.
Oh, I think I see a question from Christine. Okay, I guess we'll do the Menti first and then.
Yeah, it'll probably be easier.
Okay, one person said seed saving, which is very, very good and very exciting. The one thing, if you want another fun activity, is get a bunch of seeds and then show it to kids or even adults actually, and ask them what plant it will be. I bet you a lot of money that most people can't tell, like with some exception, cucumbers, it's pretty clear that it's a cucumber, but a lot of people can't tell a broccoli seed or a kale seed. And some people even say like, what, broccolis grow from seed? I didn't even know that. So that's something that's really cool if you want a fun activity to do.
The gleaning program here in Kamloops, they have like a quiz, and they have like the samples of all the seeds, and you try to guess which one it is. And it's so fun to see. Like the squash, you can kind of guess because you see it, but like a carrot seed or like,
oh my gosh,
beet seeds, they're so beautiful, but you could never guess unless you.
Yeah, food is magical in that way. You see something from like a tiny black dot, and then it just grows into this nutritious food that will nourish you.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely amazing.
And what we found too with some schools is that, if they don't really have access to their gardens, like, and watering systems, and in the summertime, if you just let it go to seed, then you can have a whole nother fall activity. Like, it's not bad if it's gone to seed. Like, there's still lots of things you can do from that. So that's been really cool.
Exactly. Oh, it's interesting. Dissemination. I didn't think that it would come through dissemination. Okay. Maybe that's from, just there's different ways that you can disseminate information and knowledge around food. It doesn't have to be like a boring lecture. That's why in emergency preparedness, they use the zombie metaphors. It's precisely because people just don't care. They're not going to move their bums to actually do something. But then somehow if you put that zombie image, then people start like, ooh, maybe I should pay attention. So yeah, that's what I find. That's what I find. So, that definitely did get the students' attention, because if I put food apocalypse, no one would actually show up. But the zombie one made people show up.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's what Sonia mentioned. That is what I meant by dissemination. Thanks, Sonia. That's awesome. Okay, so maybe I should answer Christine's question. I think Menti is done. Okay, so Christine Kellehu, who's awesome. And by the way, Christine is an adjunct prof at SFU. You should check her out. She does really amazing talks. So she says, what do you see as the primary areas of focus for addressing food security in the Canadian context, and more specifically in the Metro Van context? For example, you mentioned the 3-day limit in supply. Okay, that's a very big question. I think it's an important one, and I think that's where you can talk about the long-term planning, the long-term resiliency strategy. So what a lot of cities have done, and I think Metro Vancouver has done one, is the like a food system resiliency strategy. Maybe it will need to be updated soon, especially because of things like COVID. But one thing that's really important is that realization that, wow, we rely so much on supermarkets to get a lot of the things that we do. And when supermarkets are disrupted, we are very, very precarious, right? So I think that in planning cities, we really need to think more about the effective use of space and land, not only to grow food, because I think or just like small community gardens or urban agriculture would like the smaller one would just not be enough. We need to think more about like strategic growing of food, to enable us to have like a plan B and a plan C and a plan D. Another thing also is like, having more food hubs, like food hubs where we can, process food better. A lot of, for example, I started a neighborhood buying group with a farmer. So this farmer relied so much on restaurant clientele. When all of the restaurants were shut down, suddenly, he has a farm right here in the Lower Mainland, and suddenly he lost all of his clients, and his food was going to go to waste. And thankfully, what he did was he managed to connect with a few different eaters, and we said, okay, well, why don't we come together as a group and just buy directly from you? And I've been eating very well because he grows a lot of really good food. I'm talking about like literally hyper local, just like 15-minute drive, and then just here's your farm fresh food. So I think that a lot more option would be definitely good for all of us, so we're not just relying on a few kind of food infrastructure.
Yeah. That's awesome. So Christine's follow-up, this fallingfruit.org, I've never seen this map before. That's super cool. So Volunteer Vancouver Corp, more specifically the Emergency Support Services volunteers, have developed food mapping. And she's found that there's a big lack of awareness in community members as to the number of food sites that are in the city. And opportunities to address local food insecurity.
So that falling fruit, so in Toronto, I remember there was now I forgot the name of it. Oh, not far from the tree. It was a community urban orchard group where if you had a fruit tree and you don't have the time to harvest it, or you don't have the time to take care of it, not far from the tree would come and then actually pick up your fruits, share some with you, and then like distribute it to food charities, agencies, community kitchens. The thing is that, again, like when we talk about food asset, usually what's talked about are the supermarkets or the restaurants, things like that. But we need to think more about like the other assets, like the long-term assets, like the trees, the land, things that we grow, the water. So let's not pollute the water, because that's where the fish and the biodiversity will be, right? So food asset mapping should be a little bit broader.
Yeah, for sure. So it sounds like there's also a fruit tree project. There's one in Metro Vancouver.
Oh, cool.
Also Life Cycles in Victoria, and the Gleaning Abundance program here in Kamloops.
Yeah.
I think it's crazy how much food, like in Kamloops, they harvested like 20,000 pounds of fruit. It's just like in people's backyards, and it would, I mean, it's kind of a bare thing, but really you get to feed all these different people. So it's pretty amazing the waste.
I know. It becomes a waste, right, when it's not strategically used. But another thing also, I find that a lot of fruit tree operations rely so much on volunteer labor, right? And that can become very problematic, especially, when we think about a lot of really great food organizations, food groups that are doing things just all on either volunteer basis or like shoestring budget. I think this is where we can think about, okay, for a long-term food self-sufficiency and resiliency, we need to start investing in all of the good things, right? In all of the things that actually will matter for our survival. We realize that a lot of things that we used to care about before the pandemic actually don't really matter for our daily survival, right? And then we need to kind of start prioritizing. So that's great.
I feel like this COVID has kind of put a lot of different things into focus.
Oh, there's a really good question. Is it Lout? IOUT? Anyway, it says the ALR, so the Agricultural Land Reserve, must be celebrated as a vision and be added to. Richmond has beautiful soil. How can we support the ALR in the province? Very good, because the one thing that we need to protect is definitely the land, because once it's paved over, then, you know, it's pretty much very hard to kind of recover from that. The one thing that I would say again is, you know, average age of farmers, 55. A lot of farmers that I talk to are having a difficult time, you know, kind of making the basic, their basic needs. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of, you know, so there's a lot of challenges and risks faced by farmers. And I think what's really important, again, for long-term food resiliency is that, okay, we have this ALR, we need to pair it with some sort of economic development plan that will really strengthen and enable farmers to actually grow food, to make farming an activity that will, you know, that will give them a living wage. So I think that's a big, you know, message, because as we see from all of the news media, so many farmers, again, they, with this disruption, they actually can't distribute their food, you know. Maybe they're used to selling to institutions and restaurants, and then suddenly, if you're trying to distribute to individual eaters or consumers, you need to package your food differently, right? You can't just say, here's a big jug of giant milk, like as if you would say sell it to Tim Hortons or whatever. So it's just about like having enough diversity. That's where we talk about the polyculture or diversifying instead of the monoculture. It's like too much reliance on one thing will make you vulnerable. So that's where we need to diversify. Another thing, rarest soil globally is within the ALT. Totally okay. Christine said cheap food needs to be seen for what it is, void of actual cost. Yes, there's a book that I really want to, oh, I don't have it with me, but it's called The Real Cost of Cheap Food by Dr. Michael Carolyn. So good, The Real Cost of Cheap Food. Because, you know, you think about eating a burger, like a fast food burger, you get it maybe for $5. You're not counting the cost of all of the different externalities, right? Those externalities, we will pay for it at the end, not only from our health standpoint, but also from our tax dollars with, like, you know, more healthcare issues. So I think that we need to start kind of factoring in, but then at the same time, you know, because people then argue, well, then food will be more expensive and that will create issues with affordability. But I think that's the whole point though. You know, the system is not balanced. It's not just. So a lot of people can't afford food, even when food is cheap, because rent is too high. So sometimes in order to tackle a food issue, you actually have to tackle the other parts. Like, you have to tackle housing and living wage in order to tackle food, right? So it can't just be one thing. It has to be like a systems perspective. So that's good.
There's so many things involved in food. It's so cool once you get into it. You're just like, oh my gosh, this isn't, but that's why it's kind of fun. Like, that's why I got into it, is because it connects. You can talk about air quality and soil, and like, it's a political thing. Like, there's so many, and food is a really nice way to start the conversation, especially with youth, and that it's really tangible. It's not, oh, well, there's a water problem. Okay, yeah, I can't see it, but food, I understand.
Yeah, and I think, and thanks to Christine, she mentioned like she loves the justice perspective. So in my class at SFU, a lot of what we do is also, I mean, unfortunately, we can't do that right now because we are asked to do more like online courses for now, just for everyone's safety. But food opens the world to different cultures, different identities, and it's a space to create, you know, so I often, you know, coming from the background that I come from, it's a great space for me to introduce, for example, people who are not familiar with my, you know, spiritual celebration or my faith tradition. I invite them over for the holidays and I say, okay, so this is the kind of food that we eat during Eid, you know, and that opens up new conversation and dialogue. And I think a lot of conversation is easier to do when you're eating good food, because then your belly is full, you're not hungry, you kind of make new friends. And so, yeah, that's good. Oh, Sonia said, can you please type the name of the author for the book, Real Cost of Cheap Food? Yes, I will type the name to all of you. So it's called Michael Carolyn. And you can get it, I mean, it's not that expensive. There's a lot of used copies too. There's, I think, different editions, but all of the editions are good. So The Real Cost of Cheap Food. If you're teaching a course or if you just want to read, like, they have all of the information. So you will never have someone that just says like, oh, you know, but like that means that food is not affordable, or, you know, we actually like cheap food because cheap food means that people can, you know, more people can have access to it. But that's not really the case with cheap food. it's never really the case because there's so much that we lose, you know, with it too. Okay, you're welcome.
So what would you say, I mean, when I was working at the farmer's market, you have lots of people who come and say, well, this is really expensive, whatever, this head of lettuce is $3.50.
Yeah.
So what could you say, you know, without like yelling at, you know, like you kind of like, it's like a mix of like, you don't want to put anybody down, but you kind of an opportunity to educate, or how would you talk to children about the real cost of food? Because there's a lot of hidden things in there.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I actually had a conversation with my kids. So I have 3 kids, a 12, a 9, and a 6-year-old. And they were just talking about, you know, Mama, if we get Pepsi, it's like 59 cents, right? Like in a can. It's like, it's so cheap. Like, why are we even drinking water? We can just drink Pepsi. I'm like, what are you talking about? I do food for a living. You want to get Pepsi instead of water? Like, what's wrong with you? But anyway, so I think what's really important is, like, first, in many cases, yeah, for a lot of people that are working multiple jobs, like 3 jobs, paying rent, and they barely have enough. Yeah, absolutely. The food is not affordable. But what we need to do is we need to, instead of making food affordable, we need to make people be able, this is grammatically incorrect. We need to make them be able to afford food. That's a different lens, right? Having people have the capacity to afford food means that you're empowering the person. You're empowering the person. You're making sure that maybe they have a universal basic income. It means that they're having a living wage instead of, you know, $14 an hour. It means that, you know, their housing situation is much better, so they can afford food rather than making food affordable, which means that maybe like you keep on driving down the cost of food. So it's a different lens of looking at things. And then another thing also is, like, you know, I think that there's a lot of expectations around food that are not realistic because, again, the externalities and the dollars are in different things, like the waste, the exploitation of labor, all of the issues with the pollution, and so that does not get counted, and then we have to pay for it later, right? So you know, just like with recycling, you have extended producer responsibility, where the industry themselves have to kind of like pitch in and like pay for the management of the packaging. Similarly with food, the industries have to do more to actually pay for the true cost of food, you know, in advance, rather than just kind of like pushing down the price and then making us pay for it later on with environmental issues. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That was a long rant. So I think I have like 6 more minutes. I don't know if you if anyone has any more questions, or if anyone will tweet me something, it would be great. You know, I have this like prize from this local bookstore. So and it will be a gift card. So yeah, I just love to get ideas. Oh, Sylvie said, part of the solution is educating people on self-sufficiency, growing food trade, community gardening. Yeah, and I think this is why, like, I've done 2 webinars with Farm to School, and also like very happy to do, like, you know, participate and collaborate, because it starts at a very, very young age. You know, when we talk about the climate change effect, right, with Greta, yeah, so with Greta and her movement for the strike, the climate strike. So it really, really should start early. I know that for a lot of students, for example, entering universities, many of them don't actually have that knowledge of, or the space even, right, to actually cook food. And so then when you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the space, you know, then you might be more reliant on kind of like pre-made or highly processed food. So I think you're absolutely right, Sylvie. It's so important. The education piece is so important. And I think with education, it's also like, it's so important to think also beyond schools, because I watch a lot of YouTube videos too. And some of the food kind of tips, strategies, cooking stuff, it's free and very accessible and very entertaining. So I also go to YouTube. Yes, so I will share the presentation deck. I'm sorry if there's that scary zombie. So I hope that doesn't turn you off too much. Yep. Okay, if you had to focus your efforts on one action to address food resiliency in Metro Vancouver, what would that action be? Okay, so Metro Vancouver is regional, right? I think right now it's so important just to create the basic awareness. Again, as I mentioned, that kind of level of, yeah, this is actually, you know, I'm in public health. Well, public health is different. I think you guys understand that it's an important part of your work. I think teachers should know, okay, this is an important part of my work. Politicians should know, you know, if people are hungry, you're probably not going to get reelected. Planners should know, because if they keep on developing things on very sensitive, you know, ecological land, then you're going to lose that capacity for food production. I think we need to bring together a multitude of people from different disciplines, right? Everyone from engineering to food scientists to, you know, you name it. There's always going to be a space where there's cross collaboration or learning, and that's because everyone needs to eat food. Everyone needs to eat food. So there's always going to be something that we can talk about that we have in common, and we need all of the different expertise to be able to do like some sort of strategy or like long-term visioning. Yeah. So we are all food champions, and we need to own this fact. That's right. we are food champions. So yeah, that's it from me, I guess. I hope you can, yeah, please feel free to keep in touch. And I'm also on LinkedIn if you want to add me on LinkedIn. And that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Soma. That was so lovely. I feel like it was like a breath of fresh air with all of our Zoom calls.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to, just before we end here, we have one more webinar happening in our series, which is next Wednesday from, again, the same time, 3:30 to 4:30. And we're hearing presentations from some UBC researchers about research that they've done about school lunches. Oh shoot, sorry, I have the wrong caption there. Just look at the picture on the right. So it should be really good. And as ever, you can always stay in touch with Farm to School on our website. And if you're in one of our hub regions, you can sign up for the listservs. There's information that gets sent out, or a monthly newsletter, and our social media pages. So our Facebook is kind of our active one right now. We're trying to share any resources that we find and stories from across the hubs as well. So these are all of our animators from across the province. So thank you again, Dr. Soma. We really appreciate your time today and sharing your energy and expertise.
Great, and have a good dinner.
Yes.
Bye.
Everybody too. Thank you so much.